Hey there, I'm Dan Martell, serial entrepreneur, investor, and creator of SaaS Academy. And in this video, I'm gonna share with you some factors that you need to consider when valuing. That's why I'm holding this stuff, because what's more valuable? It's subjective. Your startup. Trust me, I'm just gonna pass this over to J-Dog here. And be sure to stay to the end, because I'm gonna talk about, the key factors. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the legal, and I'm also gonna share with you my fundraising like a pro strategy, which talks about the 3 phases of fundraising and how to close your round if that is the phase you're in 7 weeks. I've helped people raise over a couple $100 million using that framework. But let's get into the valuation aspect of our session today. So about 10 years ago, I started a company called Flowtown, and we decided to go raise some money. And somebody asked, "What's the valuation?" And this is the way we decided. We said 7 on 7. Why? 700,000 on $7 million pre-money. Because we heard that Mint.com at the time did 600,000 on 6 million. The city of San Francisco, where I lived at the time with my co-founder Ethan, was called the 7x7 city because it's 7 miles by 7 miles. And we just liked the sound of it. So literally we started talking to investors and they're like, "Oh, cool, yeah, no, sounds really interesting." So Flowtown was a social marketing application for small businesses to leverage email and social media data and build campaigns. And they were like, "This is really cool." We were ramen profitable. Our feeling was we were way further along than a bunch of other companies raising at lower valuations. And then they would always ask, "What's the valuation?" And we're like, "Well, we're raising 700K on 7 million pre." And I remember the first conversation where we said this, the guy said, "Wow, how are other investors taking it?" And we were just like, "Oh, really favorable, totally makes sense, et cetera, based on our traction, no pushback, no issues." He's like, "Well, I really appreciate it. You guys are amazing. Sounds like you've built a great company, but it's just probably outside of, where I like to invest." And we kept getting this time and time again. And luckily, we got some incredible advice by Nivi, who's one of the silent co-founders of AngelList. A lot of people don't even know about. He's Naval's co-founder. And he's like, "Dudes, seriously, here's all the reasons why this is crazy." And he helped us rearrange our valuation. But it was based on a bunch of things that I've since helped many founders like yourself understand, to have them go raise hundreds of millions of dollars in funding, help set probably, 100 plus founders valuation for the different rounds. But for this conversation, we're focused on kind of the seed round or the A round, okay? Because I think that in those early days, this framework kind of applies. So let's talk about those 4 key factors. Number 1, the 409A valuation. Now, if you don't know what that is, that's cool. Google it. It'll tell you everything about it. But essentially what it is a process to establish fair market value for your shares in the equity. What's the business worth? Now, the reason we do that is because legally, from a tax point of view, is we need to figure that out so that you don't undervalue your shares when you give equity to other people, or because there's a bunch of tax reasons. I'm not going to get into it, but if I give you something that's worth very little, but then you turn around and you cash it in because it's worth a lot more, then you wouldn't have paid the taxes you should have when you received it, as almost like compensation. That you should have. You may have read about Steve Jobs doing some backdating on stock options, that kind of stuff. I'm not going to get into the history, but you can Google it. It's a fascinating story. I believe the CFO lost his job or got in a lot of trouble around it, but that is why typically we do a 409A valuation. It's $1,000 or $1,500 depending. There's a lot of firms that do it, but that'll at least get you the fair market value. Okay, so if you're going to raise capital, maybe not on doing like a convertible note or a debt round, but if you're going to do a price round, you're definitely going to need it. You got to pay for it. So it might be worth doing it. But I will say this, it's not going to be high. It's just really there to just set kind of a lower threshold. Every investment I've done 30 plus investments. The fair market value was like half, if not a third of what the actual stock traded at. Which is fine, but it's just so you know that it's not the way we want to use when we go raise money from other investors. Number 2, market norms. So here's the way I think about it. There's kind of like 2 big things that are going to impact, valuation and kind of what you feel you can set. One is where you live. like I've mentioned this in other, sessions where, if you live in the heart of Silicon Valley versus, Nebraska, the valuations on your business are going to be totally different. You might see these companies, you're like, how are they worth so much? I remember a few years ago, all of a sudden the valuations for startups coming out was uncapped notes or $10 million valuation for a 6-month-old company. And look, I love that the founder was excited about their vision, about what it's worth, and they could come to me and stick to their guns and say, I really believe this is at that. But the only thing they could point to was other companies raising at similar valuation. So the market norm definitely plays a big part. And the best way to figure out what it is for your area is find people locally that have raised from other investors at those rounds in your area, right? And you can go on, there's a bunch of different sites online like AngelList and Gusto and others that will help you understand kind of what the appetite for the market is for companies at your stage of growth. And that'll give you another data point to kind of use in putting this whole thing together. Number 3, competitive process. Now, at the end of the day, and this is where I think like Y Combinator in many ways is a professional fundraising training area. And look, they provide great mentorship and their alumni network is ridiculous. And the inspirational aspect of loan of YC is worth going if you can get into it. I mean, it's crazy. But, in regards to their sole focus on growth, which I think is great, but really just so that they could create the best output for demo day, which is not bad. It's just you're essentially indexing and strategizing 100% on growth so that you can show hockey sticks so you can get the best valuation at YC. The reason why is there's a competitive process. If all of a sudden you're in a position where you have a couple hundred investors looking at your deal, coming up to talk to you afterwards, and you create a competitive process, you can feel confident to set your valuation high. On the flip side, if you're from Eastern Canada, where I grew up, and you don't have access to a hotbed network of investors, then the competitive process might be just a few rich uncles, a real estate investor that you might know, some high net worth individuals. It's not going to have that same, and many of them may not even know, and you might be the first tech investment. So if you want to increase your valuation, be sure to build a process, which I'm going to share with you at the end, on how to create a competitive process so that you have a lot of investors interested in your deal to essentially ratchet up your valuation. Whereas if you don't, then you're going to have to take maybe a sub-market norm valuation on your business. Number 4, a strong thesis. What I mean by that is your pitch, your presentation, your story, your team, all aspects of the investment and the thesis. So the way I think of all founders that are going to raise money is you need to explain what you see in the world that's different from everybody else and how you have figured out the strategy to build a $100 million a year company in the next 7 years. The thesis around that, what's changed in the world that makes your solution the right solution at this point in time to achieve that outcome, and your ability to share that narrative, to share that story, to communicate that through the product demo, through your team slide, through the market slide, and really present it well is going to have a huge impact on your ability to, set and own and claim your valuation. So in many ways, the byproduct of your ability to tell a story, which I've shared many times, if you search Dan Martell storytelling, I'll share the 3 stories that every founder needs to perfect. But your ability to do that is going to be critical for getting the best valuation on your round. Now, all those things being said, let me share this with you, because here's the risk. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. What I mean by that is I think too often founders raise high valuations in their seed rounds, the early rounds, that makes it near impossible for them to add the level of growth that there is going to be required for them to get an increase in valuation on their next round. And in those moments, what you end up happening is a down round, meaning that your valuation might have been 15, 25, 30 million at this stage of funding, and you didn't hit the numbers, and all of a sudden now the market's evaluating at you maybe 20 million, right? So you actually do a negative down round. Just because somebody was crazy enough to invest at that level does not guarantee the next person will invest at a higher level. So in understanding that, it might make sense if you know that for you to hit the next level of valuation that you want to get, maybe you take a lower number today so that you give yourself the room to grow into your valuation versus just because you can, get a 20 million pre on your first round of funding. Doesn't mean you should. You can go back to 2008, 1999, 2000 time frame. Those periods where people are getting these crazy valuations ended up hurting them in the long run because they got diluted harder because they took too much money at a higher valuation. So all this stuff's just gonna help you argue your valuation for your business. I feel like now I should have started a drinking game for you. Every time I say the word valuation, you guys should be taking a shot. Anyways, I don't even drink. But if you do, play the video over, have some fun, get your glow on. But if you really truly want to argue for the best outcome for your fundraising, I'm not gonna say the word again, then these are the key factors you got to take into consideration to really knock it out of the park. So quick recap, how to value your SaaS when fundraising. These are the key factors. Number one, you want to get a 409A valuation. Maybe not on the debt round, but definitely on your on a price round. Number two, market norms. Number three, competitive process. And number four, strong thesis. As I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, I want to share with you my Fundraising Like a Pro training. It is literally the best training. I got taught by Travis Kalanick, the founder of Uber, who was an early investor and formal advisor to Flowtown. The guy, you can't dispute, was one of the masters, and literally most of the training that I teach you comes from Travis himself. He's raised billions of dollars. That framework has helped people that work with me raise hundreds of millions of dollars, but it's yours. If you click the link below, you can get access to that. I go over the 3 phases of fundraising and really a strategy and checklist for how to do it in the next 7 weeks, which is aggressive, but it's possible. My last round of funding I did for Clarity, I did it in 3 days. Why? Because I executed the framework called the pre-funding phase. There's a pre-phase to getting ready to actually fundraising, so check out the marketing phase that will help you close those deals. Click the link, you can download that. If this video has been helpful, feel free to share it with a friend that you care about. Click the like button, subscribe if you're new, and as per usual, I want to challenge you to get up every day and live a bigger life and grow a bigger business, and I'll see you next Monday. How to value your SaaS fundraising. What's more valuable?